Thank you, Faye. It's a real pleasure to be here and great to see that the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute has saved the best for last here on a Friday afternoon. We're very fortunate to have a great panel and a very interesting topic to go over. Subsidiary boards and succession planning, very challenging. How to do it right, how to blend and manage the process effectively to ensure that the subsidiary gains all the benefits, but still retains, the entrepreneurial spirit that it needs to be effective. So we've got a great panel to review this, and I'll briefly introduce them. Their full biographies are on the site. Is that correct? I believe so.
It's on the agenda, which was shared.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Great, wonderful. I'll start off. Our first panelist will be Jackie Quamina. Jackie's an attorney at law by profession and has extensive experience as a director in the Caribbean, having served on boards in Barbados, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago. Former chairman of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, Ms. Quamina has also served as a director of TSTT, TTNGL, Unilever Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean Financial Holdings Limited, Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, and the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, just to name a few. A former executive director of Republic Bank and a former group general counsel and corporate secretary. Jackie has widespread hands-on experience in governance and corporate law, having been responsible for conceptualizing and structuring the Republic Financial Holdings Group as a Caribbean banking entity. So we're very fortunate to have Jackie join us. And Jackie, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very fortunate position we're in two respects. One, that we're coming after Douglas Orain, who gave a wonderful introduction on the sort of overview of groups and subsidiary management and his thoughts on that. And also, we're also very lucky that we're still in lockdown in Trinidad and the bars are closed. So people have really nowhere to go but to sit and listen to us. But we'll try and keep it interesting nevertheless. All this week, we've really been looking at sustainability, how you reset your values and you consider sustainability. People, I think, are the most vital asset that an organization has. And succession planning then becomes one of the most critical of board functions. In most companies, well, in all companies, I would think, of a certain size, the succession plan usually belongs to the governance committee. And it can take place at three levels. It could take the board of directors. This is the need for succession planning. The board of directors, executive and senior management, and the employees. But here, I think we are going to focus in on succession planning for the board of directors. The ability of the organization at the end of the day, and we're looking at the organization as the particular company, as well as the group. The ability of the organization to implement strategy and operate profitably and manage disruption and uncertainty is dependent on the caliber of persons its employees. So therefore, it is critical that they have a very clear, well thought out succession plan. Now, succession planning usually takes, at least the appointment of directors, usually takes place, one would say legally, at the shareholder level. It's an election of directors is a shareholder function. But the reality is the selection process and the nomination comes from the board of each subsidiary. Similarly with management, just to touch on that, although the appointment of senior management is a board function, the selection process and the suitability of a person for appointment will come up from management. Strategy, and we discussed this in the last session, strategy is set by the parent company. Also, the culture, the values, the ethics, matters of diversity and inclusion. Therefore, parent company input or even approval of the succession plan of each subsidiary at the board and senior management level is critical. You don't want to have a subsidiary that is doing something contrary to the overall strategic plan for the group. Neither do you want, and you can have a situation where you would have, say the parent company has taken a decision, doesn't want to be in a certain line of business, wants to dispose of certain entities or wants to merge them. These things might not be known to the subsidiary yet. So really, and the succession plan has to take these factors into account when they're appointing people to their board and to their senior management. So therefore, it's critical that your parent company be involved in the crafting of the succession plan. So we have succession planning being done at each subsidiary level in each of your company, each of the companies in the group. And I think that is the correct place for it to be. But each governance committee at each subsidiary level has certain things that they have to consider. They'll have to consider their shareholder, which in the case of the subsidiary is going to be the parent company. So there's no point doing something that you know is not going to get approval from the shareholder. And you also have to consider the strategic direction of the parent, which we just spoke about. You also have to look at the nature of the business. So for the parent company, if it is looking at strategic planning, looking at the succession plan of its subsidiary, it has to consider the nature of the business it's in. Is it a branch in a bank, or is it an insurance company? What is the nature of the business? And that will influence the type of persons you would want on your succession plan for your board. You also have to look at your skills matrix, the type of talent you want that is be useful to the organization, diversity, and then this thorny question of independent directors versus executive directors. And then of course, tenure. So there are lots of factors that the governance committee of each subsidiary has to consider when they're crafting their succession plan. The overall parent company has to consider all these factors as well in respect of their own composition of their own board, as well as for each subsidiary. Quite often one would encounter, and again, this is something we kind of touched on in the last session as well, subsidiary pushback, because nobody likes to be told what to do. And in the subsidiary, you're going to find that they're going to say that really, you don't understand the business. You don't know the business. Why are you interfering? We know the type, the caliber, the type of talent we need on our succession plan on our board. And you really don't know or understand the business. Where the subsidiaries span different territories or different areas or regions, you have the issue of you don't understand the culture. The parent doesn't understand the culture. So how can you hope to put people or choose people to put on our board if you don't understand the culture of the country or the region? And then there's a question of confidentiality. And this is a whole discussion on its own. There have been often many situations which I have encountered where you get subsidiary pushback when it comes to sharing information. No parent company likes a runaway subsidiary. So I suppose in crafting your group, you have to craft your group bearing in mind that you're going to have a board that is responsible for this subsidiary, and you require certain information from it. And how do you get that information? And I have seen situations where the subsidiaries have said, no, parent is not entitled to that information. We're not giving it. Or you don't need that level of detail. So subsidiary pushback is a very real thing. And you have to make sure that you have sufficient agreements between the subsidiary, MOUs or some form of documentation that allows or requires the subsidiary to provide information to the parent so that you are able to have the cooperation and the cooperation of the subsidiary moving forward. The parent looks at its subsidiary, it is an asset. So they are looking at it in terms of the strategy for the group. They're looking at control. They are responsible for standardization of the systems and processes, the legal and the and they also have the legal and regulatory responsibility. So the role of the parent is really responsible for a clear corporate governance framework, which includes the succession plan. How do they ensure that this takes place? It really is a question of, and I think it requires an astute chairman and a very astute CEO to ensure that you're able to pull the group together, pull all the subsidiaries together, and structure a group with the caliber of persons one wants on each subsidiary that is able to contribute to and give value to the group as a whole. And that takes a considerable amount of tact. You need consultation between members of the parent company, not necessarily the board, but the parent company and its subsidiaries. There must be consultation. You have to engage them and you have to communicate. It's a question of communication and dialogue if you're going to have a viable succession plan with the right kind of persons on it. It's very interesting in Trinidad now. I was looking the other day at the central bank has a new governance guideline, and that really takes on the, looks in depth at groups and subsidiary governance. And it really is very clear on the role of the parent and its responsibility for governance and also for succession planning and making sure that the proper governance and framework is there for all its subsidiaries. So this is not just, we have passed a stage where subsidiaries can push back and say, I'm an independent and I have a board and my board is responsible. But here we have the central bank recognizing, they don't say how you do it, but the central bank is recognizing that holding company or the parent board has a responsibility for its subsidiary and for its governance framework. So I think that's a very interesting development. But as I said, the difficult part there is making sure that you have that proper relationship between your subsidiaries and the parent that allows the development of a proper succession plan and allows the growth of an appropriate governance framework. It really is the preparation or the drafting of, and I said craft because it really is a really complex task. It's really a three-dimensional work of art at the end of the day, almost, to have the succession plan for your group, which takes into account the needs of every single of the subsidiaries and as well as the parent. It has to pull together the appropriate talent to ensure the sustainability of the group and every subsidiary. And it has to be forward thinking so that it pulls in the right kind of talent to ensure that the strategic plan is implemented. So it must be dynamic and it must be able to change, and because you are in a very fluid environment. It's not a task to be taken lightly, but it's critical to the success of your group as a whole. So at the end of the day, I sort of want to close this very general discussion on the fact that governance really is, it's more than just rules and regulations and policies and procedures. It really takes a certain amount of talent and interaction, sensitivity by the persons who are implementing governance in order to make it successful. I have seen governance used as to obstruct and to hinder, and in a group setting that can be disastrous because the right information doesn't pass and you have the wrong people in the wrong places. what you really need is a really open communication. And as I said, you need a very street smart CEO and chairman that is able to pull it all together. If it can, at its best, it will be an enabler of the culture and a guardian of the ethics of the company. It will set the tone and give the whole, the culture of the group, and make sure that that is implemented. All right, thank you.
Very well done, Jackie. Very interesting. You know, I think you really touched on a couple of very interesting points where you talk about, you know, the sensitive crafting of the right people. Sometimes people just think, well, the parent will tell the subsidiary what to do, and here's who you'll appoint. And we've seen that happen, and not successfully, I think, in probably both our experiences. You know, I think you've hit it on the head where you get the right kind of people and the sensitivity and the street smart CEO and chairman, chairperson to really make sure it's handled well. Maybe just to delve a little bit more, you know, we know that the board of the parent companies will have executive, or not many executives, mostly independent directors. Do you think some of those directors at the holdco or parent level should be placed on the board of the subsidiaries? Or do you think it's more a place for management of the parent company to really maybe go onto a board of a subsidiary and learn about the group that way? What's your thinking?
Actually, that actually came up in the last session as well. My view is that on your holding company board, at your parent board level, you really want the independent directors. You want independent thought, new ideas, strategic thinkers, big thinkers. On the operational level in your subsidiary boards, it could be a little more hands-on. And I think it's important that your senior management know and understand your group that you're operating with as well. So I don't think there's much value to be gained from putting a holdco director on a subsidiary board, but I would certainly put management, executive management. I think they have a lot to learn. They need to be able to understand the culture of the group, the culture of the operations in the different territories or regions, or even the different areas. So they should, so if it's an IT sub or a shared services sub or something like that, they really need to understand that. So I think putting the executive management there, one or two, but you have to get the right balance there again in crafting, your board. You have to consider that. Yes. And there are only so many seats on a board, so you might not hit all the nails every time.
Well, that's very interesting. You know, my experience at the Scotiabank Group was very much the same. You know, Scotiabank Group probably had 100 subsidiaries around the world, but I can think of only one case where a parent company group director was actually on the director of a subsidiary. All the rest were management, and we felt it was a way to develop management. You know, and develop not only their strategic skills, interpersonal skills, to be able to learn the culture of countries around the world. So we certainly were aligned with your thoughts there. So very, very interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Great stuff, Jackie. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'd like to turn it over to Wendy Kerry. Really pleased to have Wendy join us on our panel today. Wendy is the Senior Vice President, Corporate Governance and Corporate Secretary at Massy Holdings, obviously a publicly listed company. Massy Group is one of the largest in the region, is a value-driven business, comprises over 60 companies in 5 business sectors across 11 territories. Doing great things with the group, and you know, Gervais Warner and the team and Kerry really making transition of the group, and a huge amount of change going there. Wendy is an attorney and barrister at law, admitted to practice in Trinidad and Tobago and England and Wales. Her academic qualifications include a Bachelor of Arts from the University of the West Indies, great, go UE, and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of London, a Master of Sciences in Economic Regulation and Competition from City University in London. And Kerry also serves as a director of the board of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. So great background, and really pleased to have you with us, Kerry. Sorry, Wendy. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute for inviting me to be a part of this panel discussion. It's very interesting. And it got a lot more interesting after Jackie's conversation and thoughts there. You'll see that I guess Massy's doing some things a little bit differently. I'm really sorry that I missed some of the earlier sessions today on subsidiary governance, because they would have touched on some of the matters in this conversation. I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of subsidiary governance and subsidiary succession planning for the Massy group. Governance it's definitely an evolution, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So for the Massy group, we have a 98-year-old history as a conglomerate that grew by acquisition. We're currently in 14 territories or so, but that would have evolved over time in various business sectors. So it makes it pretty complex. Massy's parent board as well grew through the old days of command and control, where the board could be described as, you know, the all male, pale and stale. We had a CEO who was also the chairman. We evolved a little bit and established a governance committee of the board. That only met once a year to approve executive salaries and bonuses. And we've now evolved to a place where we have a governance, nomination, and remuneration committee at the parent board level that discusses succession planning on a quarterly basis and also has a line of sight into the subsidiary boards. Now, it's a little bit different with Massy because we operate in different business sectors. So I'll get into that a little bit later. But the truth is, the parent had to evolve first in order for the group governance to evolve. It had to build the systems, the board evaluations, you know, establish a fair and independent nominations process, continually assess, you know, its board composition, move to discussing board succession planning on a quarterly basis, you know, coming to see board refreshment as something that was key to optimal board performance. But the truth is, and I think Jackie touched on it, in practice, systems, processes, policies do not guarantee good corporate governance, although they are an important part of the system. And I know Mervyn King kicked off Corporate Governance Week here, and he is actually, I quote him all the time for corporate governance, because he defines corporate governance is essentially about effective leadership. And Susan David, who's a psychologist at Harvard Medical School and a TED speaker, she says, leadership isn't simply a skill set. It's a way of being in the world. It's about humility, vulnerability, clarity, and trust. Corporate governance is about effective leadership. It's about a way of being in the world. And the Massy Group's purpose is a force for good, creating value, transforming life. And we get held to account for that. And one of Massy's core values is love and care. And that is the glue that holds it together for the group. It's that values-based approach to governance and to leadership. Developing a culture of leadership, of love and care, of value for all stakeholders makes the job of parent and subsidiary board succession planning more focused. But I can say that at Massy, we are still in the process of evolution of succession planning for subsidiary boards. And we are in that dilemma, that quandary of retaining control at the parent while unleashing entrepreneurship. You know, all groups are, you always will be, and you must continue to look at it and assess and reassess, because the subsidiary must honor the group values. The reputation of the group lives in each subsidiary. And we must unleash entrepreneurship in the business. But you can't do that with a command and control approach. Now, with the legacy of a culture of command and control, which we did have, which is not just the legacy of our corporate entities, but the legacy of our colonial history, we recognized that it was a culture that had to be dismantled in order to ensure that the businesses became more agile. And it was an ugly thing to look at this history and this legacy in the face and face what was needed to be done. And it was the only way to intervene. And the Massy group is broken up primarily into 3 main portfolios. We do have a strategic and other investments portfolio of businesses, but I'm going to just stick with what we're doing in the 3 main portfolios just for the purposes of this conversation. Each of these groups have a portfolio board that has its own charter, its own audit and risk committees, its own people and culture committees. The templates for these charters are set at the parent level. And remember, these are not regulated entities. These are not financial entities. So the templates are set at the parent level. However, the final versions are approved for the portfolio boards. So for example, you might see the gases line of business tweaking it because they have a higher standard for health and safety. So the portfolio boards are actually managed in such a way that its subsidiary boards, because it's a portfolio of companies in, like, let's say motors and machines, its subsidiary boards are either mirrored or there are exception boards based on the strategic, legal, jurisdictional, or tax-related circumstances around each entity. So the portfolio board keeps an overview of what we call a portfolio matrix, all of the companies, its directors, and the rationale for the composition of each. These portfolio matrices are tabled for note, not for approval, for note at the governance committee of the parent board, because it gives it line of sight, not only on the rationale for board composition, which it can guide, but it also has a perspective on the group legal structure and on subsidiary life cycle. So initially, when we set out only 2 years ago, actually, to further strengthen the governance of these portfolio boards, it was considered important to, at that time, and I guess Jackie and I will have a chat a little bit after. At that time, we considered it important to infect the culture of governance that was at the parent board into the subsidiary boards. And this was done by establishing cross-directorships from the parent board into the portfolio boards, especially in the area of audit and risk. So they no longer became boards of management. The independence came from the parent, but also from outside, because completely outside the company, because the second step was then to consider the strategic direction of the portfolio, which is a little bit different if you had a conglomerate that was only in one line of business. So we wanted to strengthen these portfolio boards, and we considered whether the composition supported what was required in terms of specialist skills for business sector, different competencies, diversity to strengthen the boards. But the focus was always entrepreneurial drive and agility. So the governance was enhanced, but the focus was always entrepreneurial drive and agility. And the parent board still remained a check and balance, having established that purpose that I mentioned earlier, the values and the culture that moved away from command and control. It also strengthened its enterprise risk management. It strengthened the portfolio audit function, and it got some clarity, better clarity on what remained for consideration at the portfolio audit level and what were exception items to come back to the parent audit committee. So it did enable these portfolios to become more agile and to unleash their entrepreneurial drive while still having a check and balance in the system, a big part of which was the culture and the leadership. We then went on to implement board self-evaluations. And, personally, I actually thought that these boards would reject it and just think of it as a burden. And the truth of the matter is, they are now continuously in conversations of distinguishing between operational and strategic issues. Those boards were primarily operational boards, but they're setting their own strategy, and they do know the business, and they're setting their own budgets, and they're coming back and bringing these things back to parent to stress test it above a certain threshold. So historically, they were operational, but they are becoming more and more strategic, and they are growing their businesses. So, I really think it's not a one-size-fits-all. It really depends on the industry, it depends on the business, it depends on the group. And I can say as well that we're still on our journey. We are looking forward to, having other discussions to improve our subsidiary boards in the coming year. Looking at issues of, should we actually, that question, should we actually have more independent directors on the board? Currently we have, I wouldn't say even a third. Increasing diversity on the subsidiary boards. We are still on the road to strategic refreshment and succession planning for our subsidiary boards. So that's the Massy story.
Well, it's a great story and great presentation. Thank you so much, Wendy. It's a great story, and the proof is in the pudding as we've seen the business grow and prosper, under challenging times. Maybe just delve in a little bit more. You talk about being on the evolution. What do you think was the most challenging part of the evolution as you move forward with changing the composition of your boards and how it affected your succession planning?
I would say changing mindsets. It would have required many conversations to for example, change or get traction or enrollment on any particular issue. And it's not because people were necessarily averse. One, I guess there wasn't, many people were not exposed, but secondly, they were busy running their businesses. And when a business issue comes up, and is on the table, if you want to table, hey, let's have some board evaluations, that's going to go down to the last thing on the agenda where they're rushing through the end of the meeting at 6 p.m. So that was the most challenging thing.
And how have you seen that evolve? How have you addressing that challenge, and how successful do you think you've been?
Well, I think, people like Faye and Jackie would have probably also had this challenge. I think it's education and exposure of your board members over time. And they now lead those conversations. I don't have to lead it anymore. And I can actually tell you, and, I learned to know what I needed to explain and to teach, and what I needed to bring somebody else in to explain and teach.
Okay.
Because you hear different people differently, right? As human beings, we always do. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. That's extremely relevant to these days and times, and wish you all the continued success. Now I'll turn it over to Sandra Glasgow. It's a problem with Sandra's CV to try and bring it down. It's so impressive and varied. So we're really fortunate to have Sandra here with us. I'll start off that she's the founding and managing director of Biz Tactics, a consulting company dedicated to mentoring growth, aspiring firms, and promoting best-in-class corporate governance in the Caribbean region. And her directorship and certifications are extremely broad. Obviously, a long and distinguished directorship with the NCB Group, friendly competitors to the Scotiabank Group during my days there, but also many other boards in other industries as well, in the medical field, Stanley Moda Limited, DRT Communications, and of course, areas of helping civil society and NGOs as director of Multicare Youth Foundation, the National Crime Prevention Fund, Student Loan Bureau, and other areas. Obviously, again, another fine graduate of the University of the West Indies. I could go on and on, Sandra, but we're limited for time. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be on this panel with such esteemed ladies, and it's good to meet them. I'm pleased to, and I just want to thank the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute for inviting me to be part of this Caribbean Corporate Governance Week. I was saying to Kamala earlier that I was at the very start of CCGI. Nigel, you'll recall. I think I was one of the presenters at one of the very first seminars that CCGI did in Trinidad. So it's great to be here. And I'm pleased to be on this panel in my capacity as chair of the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee of the NCB Financial Group. The vision of NCB, the NCB Financial Group, is to be the premier Caribbean financial services group, delivering superior products and services to satisfy the needs of our customers, while developing our employees and building the communities we serve. We are the ultimate financial holding company of the group. We were incorporated in 2016, but National Commercial Bank has a 135-year history. NCB Financial Group is listed on the Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago stock exchanges, as was NCB before NCBFG came about. So the group comprises the NCB, the bank, and its subsidiaries, which operates in Jamaica, the UK, and Cayman. It also involves the Guardian Group, and I think Guardian has an even longer history, and the group now operating in 21 countries across the English-speaking and Dutch Caribbean, with a number of subsidiaries, and then Clarion Bank based in Bermuda. So collectively, the NCB Financial Group includes about 50 operating companies, each with its own board of directors. So you can see the challenge we have. But the intent of the NCB Financial Group's board is to be a strategic asset to the whole group and support the achievement of our vision and mission, and of course, lead to long-term competitive advantage and increasing shareholder value. So we are firm in the belief that strong governance is critical to the group's long-term success and value creation. And in this regard, our corporate governance framework is designed to ensure that we can provide the appropriate oversight and monitoring that will help us to execute on our strategies and expand the group regionally. So our subsidiaries, our main subsidiaries, in which we have controlling interest, the Guardian Holdings and Clarion Bank, they manage their respective affairs subject to the oversight of their board of directors. However, this occurs within the scope of NCBFG's rights through our ownership and responsibility through the regulatory requirements. Of course, we are all of our subsidiaries, or most of our main subsidiaries, are regulated entities. And of course, our regulators have their own expectations of how we achieve this oversight of our subsidiaries. And this is in particular areas, as you know, the Guardian Group is principal in insurance, we are in banking and Clarion as well. So the regulators have quite a lot to say about how we provide that oversight. And as our group structure evolves, the dynamics between the group and subsidiaries will, of course, continue to evolve because we are a relatively new group. So the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee, which I chair, has adopted a very strategic approach in the form of a framework that we have developed that is geared to ensuring that there is continuous alignment of the most appropriate skills and competencies of the directors who sit on all our boards, those directors that are charged with the responsibility of addressing risks, taking tough decisions, and of course, driving shareholder value. The framework is designed to capture the reporting requirements that we have to make not only to our shareholders as we are publicly listed companies, but also to our regulators, and to ensure appropriate oversight by the holding companies themselves and the ultimate holding company, NCBFG. And in doing so, we have to take into account principles of timeliness, of relevance, and materiality. Under this framework, we are the NCBFG is the ultimate holding company, and then Guardian is the holding company for the Guardian Group, and Clarion the holding company for the Clarion Group, Clarion Bank, that is. So through this framework, we take a strategic approach to succession planning, not just for the board of the ultra holding company, but we expect that subsidiary boards will take this approach as well. And our committee is evolving this framework to make sure that succession planning across the group is consistent. So there's I just want to share with you some elements of that framework. We expect that, well, for NCBFG, succession planning is a definite priority. And we expect that the holding companies will make this a priority as well. And that this activity is going to be taken into account in the annual planning processes that the committees undertake. As part of those processes, we expect, we certainly do, and we expect the other committees in the holding companies to assess the skills and experiences of directors and, develop out of that assessment a skills and experience matrix. That matrix should reveal gaps that need to be addressed in ensuring that the board is fit for purpose. We expect that the committees will share that skills matrix as well as the gaps identified with the board, and in fact disclose it as well to shareholders as part of the corporate governance statement in the annual reports. Now, we also undertake and expect our holding company boards and their subsidiaries to undertake board effectiveness surveys and institute peer evaluation processes. And these would also provide additional avenues to assessing board and committee performance. So ideally, there should be an ongoing process of reviewing director tenures. Of course, philosophically, NCBFG does not have a formal or a rigid position on the use of tenure limiting mechanisms that drive the renewal of directors. So we do not have a formal retirement age, although I do know that some of the holding companies, both of the holding companies, in fact, have a formal retirement age. For us, we strive for a mix of tenures at certainly in the group and in the Jamaican or the subsidiaries of the NCB Bank. And we've resisted adopting the idea of a retirement age. We have resisted for some time because we find that the range of experiences that we can garner from this approach provides a much wider perspective in the understanding of the various aspects of the business, of the various businesses on which our board members serve as directors. In fact, when you look at the NCB financial group, I would say that apart from the executive directors, all the independent, well, not all, save one of the independent directors have been on the board since the company was acquired by Michael Leachin in 2002. But notwithstanding this, strategic succession planning exists at the director level throughout the group. And of course, for NCBFG, all non-executive directors must retire at least once every 3 years, but are eligible for re-election. At the present time, search efforts for new directors get underway when we have, developed our skills matrix, identified gaps, and identified the need for new directors to be recruited, perhaps 1 or 2 years in the future. And I'll just share this with you. 3 years ago, in keeping with our digital to the core strategy and the increasing incidence of cybercrime, our committee recognized the need to identify suitably qualified and experienced candidates with technology governance experience to serve on the board of NCBFG. We also recognized the fact that the chairman of the group's audit committee had served for many years, in fact, since 2002. He's actually also our lead independent director. And we needed to find a candidate to fill that position if and when this director chose to step down. So we created candidate profiles with prioritized skills and attributes and received the go-ahead from the board and set about finding prospects using our own personal and professional networks. We have not yet, although the discussion has been underway about using a search firm to find prospects. But in this case, for the technology position, we identified 2 overseas-based women who were eminently qualified, and that was perfect because then we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, and improve the gender diversity on the board. Currently, we have about 1/3 of our directors who are female. Some years ago, and prior to the enactment of Jamaica's Banking Services Act in 2014, we could nominate candidates for board positions and then get the regulator, in our case, the Bank of Jamaica, to certify those candidates as fit and proper to assume the directorship. Of course, having gone through having presented them to the shareholders at the annual general meeting or have them fill casual vacancies in between AGMs. In the last 10 years or so, and up to the passage of the BSA in the Banking Services Act in 2014, it has taken an inordinately long time for the Jamaican regulator to affirm the fit and proper status of our nominees, particularly when they are based overseas. And this is after we have ourselves put the candidates through an extensive due diligence process. This is a huge disincentive for our director prospects. Not only are they reticent about I would say, very involved, and what many of them have said is an intrusive due diligence process, but few prospects are willing to wait for up to 2 years to be licensed by the Bank of Jamaica. And so this was the case with one of the technology candidates that we had identified 3 years ago. and we're still going through the process with the other candidates. Unfortunately, COVID intervened and slowed that process even further. So in terms of having multi-year succession plans with a strong pipeline of candidates, and by multi-year I mean 3 to 5 year plans. That's our aspiration, but we are not quite there yet. That's definitely where we want to go in the future. So in terms of this framework that we have developed, the corporate secretaries at NCBFG and at the holding companies have responsibility to monitor the framework on an ongoing basis to ensure its efficacy and so that they can review and recommend changes. We recommend that review take place every 2 years, and if there are any changes, then they should be referred to the respective governance committees and then ultimately approved by the boards of the holding companies and NCBFG. We encourage consultation on any changes to the framework or any developments that might affect the framework. And we are certainly open to consultation. There are issues that we reserve the right to approve, say, board appointments. Holding companies can actually approve board appointments and advise us, but if those appointments are with respect to issues perhaps where there might be a conflict with any of our business lines, then we expect that the holding companies will refer those appointments to us for approval. Before I close, I just want to address the matter of culture, because it is something we take very seriously when we are considering our succession plans for boards. We know board seats can't be filled by anybody, especially when you are a regulated business and when the regulator has such a say in the approval process. So we want our nomination committees to be clear that they need to create profiles, candidate profiles that transparently describe the personalities, the attributes, skills and competencies for candidates. We want to aim to identify people who will work collegially with each other so that we can minimize conflict and optimize productivity. We also want to guard against groupthink by fostering the type of culture in which directors know that they can engage in rigorous discussion and they can speak candidly. They can disagree strongly, and as our CEO Patrick Hilton always says, disagree but commit. So that's really important, an important aspect of our succession planning at the NCB Financial Group. Thank you very much.
Well, that was wonderful, Sandra, and I was just thinking back to my own experiences going through the Bank of Jamaica's process. As I mentioned in our other session, I've been on boards around the world, and BOJ is the toughest. So I know it makes it challenging for subsidiary succession planning in Jamaica, in your entities there.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting how your group has developed through acquisition, spreading beyond Jamaica, spreading beyond just banking as well, and acquiring substantial groups that also have a long history themselves. So I'm wondering how how the NCB Financial Group Board is able to provide the top level oversight without stymieing the entrepreneurial spirit of your very well established group companies. Maybe you can share a little bit on that.
Yeah, and I think both Jackie and Wendy talked about leadership. And our chairman, Michael Leachin, has very, as an entrepreneur himself,
Yes.
he has very strong views about ensuring that the ultimate holding company does not stymie that entrepreneurial propensity in our subsidiaries. And Jackie spoke to the notion of having executive directors sit on subsidiary boards, and that is in fact the case for us. Both our CEO, president and CEO, and CFO, group CFO, and deputy CEO sit on several of the subsidiary boards, and that's one of the ways that we are able to was it Jackie who spoke about pushback from the subsidiaries.
Yeah.
So, it helps when there's cross-fertilization, especially at the executive level. I also want to reinforce the idea of, just the whole business of the regulatory environment. Interesting. Was it you, Wendy, or you? I guess it was Jackie talking about the new guidelines of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, that was me.
Right. Which I imagine is probably mirroring that of the Banking Services Act, which has really changed the whole face of governance for us. We have very little room to maneuver on some things. The whole business, for example, of determining the fit and proper status of directors. I spoke about that earlier. In the old days, we could identify somebody and seat them. Now we have to wait on the Bank of Jamaica, and further, we have to affirm the continued fit and proper status of our directors. And so going through that annual evaluation process and peer evaluation process, and ensuring that everybody meets all the fit and proper criteria. And so it's not just the Bank of Jamaica. In fact, it's CBTT, but it's also regulators in other countries in which Guardian operates. It's satisfying the Bermudan authorities. So it does become quite complex to, make sure that you are meeting, that your director candidates are meeting those fit and proper requirements.
Definitely. But, it's a challenge that, we will have to continue to work at. And hopefully our regulators will understand the challenges that the businesses face with the long delays in sitting directors and the impact that has on the company. So the regulators will again have to evolve as the corporate governance evolves, and the requirements on the boards will have to be matched by the performance at the regulator side. At least that's what we're going to hope and continue to encourage.
Well, Brendan, in that regard, I think the CCGI has a role to play.
I agree.
Because, bringing those two disparate bodies together, the regulated and the regulator, there are not many opportunities, although I will say that the Bank of Jamaica has recently been post, asking for regular meetings. Which for years we didn't have any of those meetings, and now we're meeting quite regularly to discuss matters, and we do bring this up in our meetings, the issues that we face. We're not sure that they're really taking us on, but at least we're raising the issues nonetheless.
That's all we can do, right? That's all we can do. So we'll keep pushing that forward. That kind of concludes the formal presentations that we had prepared as a panel, but we'd love to open it up to questions from our audience. And I'm not sure, Kamala, but best way to do that. Sometimes we'll get hands up, or we'll get.
Nigel has his hand up. So
I see our chairman does have his hand up, so we should go to him.
Chairman, I have a question in the chat.
Thank you. It's good to see three powerful ladies presenting on such a very powerful topic. So the first question I have for you three ladies is, if I look at your respective boards or the boards on which you serve, what composition is female? So that's one. Don't answer as yet. Because I have a few. This was just on, and it was very entertaining, very stimulating. And he made the point very carefully about gerontocracy. All these old people serving on boards and not making room for the younger people. Now, Sandra, you mentioned the whole.
I'm not old, though, Nigel. Is my
I
head?
know, no. I know. I'm not talking about you. The point you made about cybersecurity and getting in technology expertise, I wanted to broaden that, because the digitization strategy, which has become even more important in the age of COVID, and the social media strategy and how you connect with your customers, both in a transactional sense and in a communication sense, is critical. And a lot of dinosaurs are hanging around who have no idea what TikTok is or Instagram is, and how to
navigate.
Not only navigate, but measure the effectiveness of the strategy. Just this week, I was at another board meeting, and we had a fantastic presentation, again by a woman, and she was talking us through the strategy, but also how she was measuring the effectiveness of the strategy.
Yeah.
So for me, when you're looking at succession planning, one has to find ways to get people like that on board and get them early. As Douglas was saying, he asked for the youngest person in the session, but nobody put up their hand. They were too afraid. But the point is, you want the 30s and the 40s coming on at that stage. So what are you doing about that? Listen,
Nigel. One of the things about me, is that, I am first of all, I'm a big proponent of women on boards. I've talked a lot about it. So, and as chair of the Corporate Governance Committee, I have made sure we have one of the highest percentages of women on a public board in Jamaica. Now, I sit on the Stanley Motor Board, which deliberately has all women. We want to make a point. All women. Now, but it's not just, so diversity is something we believe in very strongly. And it's not just gender, but age. So it's one of the things that our board and me as a chairperson work very diligently on identifying, as I always say, reducing the average age of the board, right?
No good.
Yes.
So, Sanya Goff, who is a brilliant young lawyer in Jamaica, I recruited for the NCB board. And that is one of the factors that we take into account when we are looking for directors, because that has to be part of the succession plan. You can't be recruiting old people, you know, because their tenure it would be limited. So yes. And but I would also say, and this is something part of my advocacy and training activities, there is a sense that, you know, when you talk to people about board recruitment, they will talk about the pool, that the pool isn't wide enough. And so this is why I think what you're doing here is great, but because we have to really take a very strategic approach to preparing young people for these board positions. You know, and I was saying to Brendan earlier that during COVID, I wrote a guidebook on good governance for the companies in which the angel network in which I have invested, and I'm a co-founder of. For the founders particularly, and the directors who sit on the boards that they have to set up because it's part of the agreement. For our investment, they have to have a board with an independent chairman. They have to have charters. They have to have an audit committee and a compensation committee. So if we don't educate young people and help to prepare them, understanding that corporate governance is a journey, they can start somewhere. And this notion of the pool being limited, really we should get rid of that.
Yep. Douglas said the exact same thing, and I think he's on your board.
He is a member of our network for sure, and he's one of our active investors. Yes.
If I could just add there as well, I think having a group gives you it's an ideal place from which you can operate in order to encourage young people to come in. So you could really come in on a operational board or a subsidiary board, and then move
work
up,
your way up.
when you learn the business or whatever, and you've got a little more experience, move up to the parent company board where you might need a breadth of experience, a different type of experience. Yes. So there is a little scope to maneuver and make the best of the situation, encourage young people.
And also at Scotiabank, you know, our senior executives were encouraged to, or allowed to join one outside board. You know, we recognize how important that was, even though as senior executives are extremely busy, but despite that, the bank recognized that that was an important thing in their personal development as leaders and also to give back into the community. So you see our executives would join further boards outside of the Scotiabank group. And again, you know, we'd start off as directors as subsidiaries and learning best practices in corporate governance, and then join exterior boards and share that experience and continue to help governance grow and prosper.
Yes, that was a Republic policy as well, to encourage you to join at least one other, so you could see a different way of doing business.
That's right.
Let's hear from Wendy.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And Massy, we do need to, it's on our radar. We have 2 female board members at the parent board, and it's on our radar to make sure that that changes. And the truth is, the pool is global. It's global.
Exactly. Precisely.
Yep.
You know, it's our unconscious biases, all of us.
Yes.
The director level, the management level that hold us back, and we don't realize that it holds us back.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, we're talking about the age conversation. You know, I do hear conversations that, you know, sometimes people are too green. How many people, how are you going to balance your board? Or how many are you going to have? 3, 4 young people on the board and they're too green? They can't offer me the kind of wisdom that somebody else who is, you know, 60 years old or 65 years old at the end of their career. So you have these conversations, which are all these different views and positions that you do have to manage.
But so, you know, Wendy, one of the things is that, again, I really believe that your board really needs to be able to mirror your customers.
Your
right? And
community.
understand their needs,
Absolutely.
you know, because as you said, Nigel, we're in the digital age. And so, you know, I certainly don't go into the bank. I don't want to go in the bank. I do everything online. And I get
Exactly.
I have actually kind of appointed myself the customer advocate on the NCBFG board,
Good.
because the board needs to understand the things that customers are looking for and the things that are the pain points, which they often don't know, you know. So in that respect, the board ought to reflect what the customer base looks like.
Yep.
And if I could,
Other
if I could
question
just,
I had, sorry, Jackie, just one thing before you go.
yeah,
What about nationality? But
that's
if we are Caribbean conglomerate, we should be looking for board members across the region. And I don't know if you've considered that.
Well, you see, the
Jackie.
thing is that I think pre-COVID it was difficult, because even one of those directors I was talking about was actually a German woman that I met at an NACD conference in California, who sat on boards in the US. And she was so good, but then everybody thought, oh gosh, the cost of flying her from Germany, blah, blah, blah. No, it wouldn't matter. So our whole viewpoint about geography has changed, because we're probably going to operate in a virtual mode, our board, for a long time to come. I don't know when we'll get together again, but no, it's moot where you are.
Jackie,
and I wanted to make the point that when we think about diversity, yes, women on the boards is critical, and I'm an advocate for that all the time. But especially in a multicultural community like Trinidad is, I think we have other factors we have to consider. And Sandra's point is very correct. Your board needs to look like your customers, right? So you have to try and mix it up. So really, at the end of the day, when you're, I use the word when I was speaking of crafting your board, you really have to pull together so many different facets. It could be race, religion, whether you're male, female, and then you need to factor in the independence and the experience and the youth, and it's not an easy job.
Not at all.
And just to add to that, you know, the whole purpose behind, you know, having more women on the board or younger people on the board, it's not because you need younger people on the board, and it's not just because you need women on the board, it's because you need cognitive diversity. You need that different thinking to get you to that rich result when you get there.
Exactly.
And just on to that point, there's a question from the chat. Venetia Painter, to everybody, how would you recommend that as corporate secretaries, and maybe Wendy, you can jump on this first, corporate secretaries or proponents of corporate governance, we influence the change of mindset required to facilitate the younger average age board while providing the comfort required by all the relevant stakeholders?
Hi, Venetia. Nice to hear from you. It's constant and ongoing conversation. You have to be in the conversation all the time. In order to change mindsets for anything, you have to continually be in the conversation, because you have to enroll people. You can't beat them over the head to bring them along. You know that saying, you know, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. The truth of the matter is you have to take the time and the effort to enroll people.
If I could add there as well, I do believe in term limits as well. At least a term limit gives you a chance to, now we at Republic at ones, we had a flexible term limit, so your term could come to an end. But if you were in the middle of a transaction, it could be extended, so you didn't have to start all over again.
That's not my way.
It does give you a time within which you must reconsider, and you must look at your board directors and bring up new people.
Yeah, that's a term limit does generate the ability to to get the
churn.
vacancies.
Yes.
You have to get vacancies coming. So Scotia did adopt that, but we were flexible as well, you know, for if we had difficulty finding or we're in the middle of a transaction, we didn't feel it was the right time. We just appointed a new CEO, for example, of our board in Trinidad. We didn't want to lose our vice chair, so we would extend, but it does create that, and it also removes the, you know, the awkwardness and the challenge.
Yes,
You know, you go
yes.
to the same church with them, you see them, you're liming with them, and then you say to them, you have to go off the board, you know, and
I've seen
that's
people
very
very,
awkward.
very, yeah, very
very
hurt
difficult.
and angry when they've
Right,
been asked to
right.
step down.
Right.
Well,
And-
can I suggest, you know, Sandra mentioned that they didn't have term limits. We discussed it and ventilated it ad nauseum. And I would like to ask us all, to ask ourselves and ask our directors to be braver. Be the man to step out when you know, someone else can contribute more differently or better. Put the conversation of board refreshment on the table. You are not entitled to be there. And I know it's hard, but we have to change that mindset as well. Because the truth of the matter is sometimes you can lose a good director because of a 9-year term limit. And it does not mean that his independence is compromised. We have actually developed an director independence policy to support those decisions around term limits. So every year they assess every director to say whether they are still considered in their contribution independent.
Yeah, it
So-
can be
Well, it's a difficult one. It is a
very
difficult one.
difficult.
And it will evolve, but
I used to sit beside a director who was old and would fall asleep in meetings.
yeah,
Snore.
then
And I
Yes,
would
snore. I've had snoring.
table.
that's time that.
But you know, I remember having a conversation with the chair to say, you know, chair,
Mhm.
maybe we should consider getting another director, because really director so-and-so is
Part
but
of the
actually it would be interesting because he would wake up just at the right time. You know, but it was awkward. So
Yes.
you really want to, you know, not have those kinds of situations.
part of the
I
board
think I had
evaluation.
a question,
Sorry.
Brenda. I'd
I was
like
just going to say, just to finish that comment here, part of the board evaluation at Scotia was to comment on directors are all the directors making a contribution, you know, so it was anonymous. And sometimes you would see that the other directors had already seen, you know, issues like you're talking about, and they would highlight that person in an anonymous way. And generally that was dealt with, you know, we could deal with that in a positive way. So,
we didn't, at the time, we didn't do that peer evaluation, but we do it now.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think Kamla had asked about the difficulty of having directors being
Yes.
collegially, but
Express
unexpressed
candidly, right.
and disagree strongly. So I think it goes to the personalities too, Kamla. You know, and we have had situations where people have taken things personally, and it requires a little bit of massaging, and you know, the role of the chair is really important, and the lead independent director. So that's how we resolve those things. If people take things personally, which they do sometimes.
I tell you, one of my most exciting experiences was as the chair of NIB, which has the tripartite board, government, business, and labor. And it's inevitable.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it's just very, it's impossible to get certain things through because they will take a particular stance and position. To me, I don't think it's the right way to have a board, but I mean, I know that's a long-standing history that won't change, but it happens. You can have dysfunctional boards, which are very, very, very difficult to manage.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I know about those.
I wonder,
and as I always
Kamla,
say, governance can be an enabler or it can be destructive.
Any other questions, Kemla, we've missed, or that we should, any other things you'd like us to
There was
highlight?
a question
Or Nigel?
about, I had a question for CCGI, whether do you have, like, you know, our Jamaica Stock Exchange has an annual best practice awards banquet that
Yep.
they raise a lot of money. I don't know, since COVID, they haven't raised money because they haven't had the banquet. But I know for us at NCB, we, you know, go after that top prize, and we've won it more than other Alma and Scotiabank used to be.
I won it a few times too.
Yeah, maybe one, yeah. But you know, we for us, I think that I think that's a good way to you know, get companies to push the envelope in terms of good governance, to establish
That's
best
interesting.
practices. They have it for the junior market and for the main market. So I just wondered, does that happen in Trinidad, and is this something CCGI might take on if you're not doing it?
Okay, well, what I can share is that at the moment, what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago is there's a corporate governance ranking that's done by the Jack Global School. This had started about 2 or 3 years ago. They had done it in collaboration with the School of Management, I think Rotman School, out of the University of Toronto. And then in 2019, the Lockjack School did it on their own, and you know, it's one of the things that we definitely see that persons respond to in terms of, you know, that independent mix. I will tell you though that when I was first invited to be CEO of CCGI, that was one of my first thoughts in terms of what we need to do to be able to build excitement in the region and get our companies focused on corporate governance issues. So, but also, we've been looking at all the many advances that Jamaica has done, and I've been having quite a bit of conversation with Camille Facey, because it doesn't make sense we reinvent the wheel. You know, there is already something that is extremely successful in Jamaica, and I think it's something that we could look at, and it would be fabulous if we can have a Caribbean Governance Awards. And I know my chairman is here, and this has not been discussed, you know, at board level, but certainly one of the things that I would want to propose for us as part of our 10th anniversary for CCGI is that we start that Caribbean Awards next year.
That would be great.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Somebody has their hand up, Brendan.
Yes, Latoya, you have a question?
Hi,
Hi.
I may have missed an answer to this question because I did step away for about 2 minutes, but Stationery would have asked whether or not there are initiatives to start to mold younger persons. I don't know if I missed it, but I'm definitely very interested. So I'm sorry if I'm making the panelists repeat anything that might have been said already. But I think that that's something that I know most young people who are striving in their careers are also interested in. How do we properly position ourselves to become directors of the future, and not just directors by name, but directors who can contribute? And then when we do have young persons inducted into boards, how do we ensure that they understand the governance aspect of it? Because particularly when it comes to technological expertise that might be rich in the younger generation, they might have information to contribute, but may not understand the structure of the board and how their contribution would be best received and best implemented by a board and then by management, as the case may be.
You know, it's a great question. Anybody want to jump in?
Okay, so I can share in terms of just you know, some of the things that we are thinking of, because of course there have been so many great suggestions that has come our way since we have started a number of these conversations. The issue of getting young persons in a position where they can gain experience, there have been several suggestions made over the period, which includes joining NGOs and all of that. But there was a particular suggestion at the start of our International Learning Network, and this came from a student of the Lockjack School, that there be an advisory board which comprises young people only, so that they can get an opportunity to understand and experience what it's like in the boardroom, you know, in a way. So it's definitely something we have to look at to ensure that we contribute to molding young people to have that critical thinking mindset that is required in the boardroom if you're going to really be effective. So there are several suggestions that you know, we have to look at and understand how we will deal with it. And there was one other question on the chat. So Latoya, we will talk about that in the future, both you and Stacia Marie. And Venetia had a question on the chat about succession and tenure of persons in the public sector. And you know, so these conversations are really pointing to a lot of the gaps which exist. And I think building that awareness is so critical, because movement which needs to come after really should be a critical mass on the basis of a lot of persons agreeing that these are the kinds of changes that we want to see. And so it can be easier to execute, because we've had quite a bit of sharing on state enterprises, and where there are models, and Jamaica again being one, that has a system in place that says, you know, it's not in the best interest of state-owned enterprises to have an entire board just move out. Then you're stalled for a year, you know, before
terrible.
you get a board appointed, and then that board takes a year to orient itself and all that, you know. So yeah, there's some of these suggestions, and what we have to be looking at, you know, hopefully, well, we'll see when, because certainly we'll need to engage in some partnerships in this, because CCGI is limited in resources, you know, but we do have to look at how we can push that envelope towards execution of some of these ideas, and us not just talking around it and the importance of it and the benefits of it, but really not being able to move forward.
A couple of big points on youth and on public sectors. I think those are great questions. I think we're at the end of our time as we head to 6:30 on a Friday. Really thrilled by the engagement.
Nowhere to go.
Yes, that's one bad thing. I'll go to the bar at least in my house.
Yes.
Yes. But really thrilled by the engagement we've had from the panel members and our audience, who raised some great questions, and really appreciate everybody for their hard work and efforts in putting together their presentations, which I thought were excellent, very on point, and really stimulated good discussion amongst everybody here. So again, thank you so much for your contributions, and thank you so much for caring about corporate governance. Kendall, I'll turn it back over to you.